Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So as you can tell by the title of this video is going to be my labor and delivery story with baby number 3. This is my third pregnancy, my third birth, and my third little boy. He is laying right down here in his rock and play. He is asleep. He is 2 weeks old, so hopefully he stays asleep. I wanted to film this video while it was fresh in my mind. I already feel like I've forgotten some details, so hopefully this goes well. I will link my labor and delivery vlog down below and in the iCard so that you guys can go and watch that if you have not seen that. So I will just start from that morning because I had a doctor's appointment for my 39-week pregnancy appointment. I was aware that my doctor is going to be stripping my membranes because I was already 39 weeks, and she said that if I hadn't given birth at that point yet, that she would do that. So she did, and she said that it was really easy for her and it really wasn't that painful. And I was already 2 to 3 centimeters dilated, she said, and like 50% effaced, I guess. She did that and it was crampy a little bit, but I went home and I just got this sudden urge to just clean my entire house, which was, I'm assuming, nesting because, yeah. So I just started going crazy and I did all of my laundry, like every single piece of dirty laundry in my entire house. I washed, dried, folded, and put it away. Like everything. I washed all our sheets. I cleaned, vacuumed and upholstery clean. I was crazy that day. So I spent a good 4 or 5 hours doing that. And then I was thinking at least I could be active right now and maybe it'll induce my labor. So my mom was home with me because my mom was staying with us to be there for my basically when I go into labor, and she watched the kids while I did all that. And then I'd say around 2:30ish, I bent over to change the trash bag under my sink because that's where we keep our trash, and I felt a little gush of fluid down there, and kind of the entire day I'd had more discharge, and the fluid was kind of greenish, tinged. And so I was thinking is this my mucus plug? So I was sitting there on my phone googling like crazy, and I guess some people said that it could be watery. That wasn't my experience with my other two, so I was kind of weirded out that I was having this weird watery green discharge. And then I was it could be my water, but my water should be clear, it shouldn't be green. So I was thinking it has to be mucus. This is disgusting. So it gushed out a little bit and I was what is that? And I just kind of ignored it and I put a pad on. Obviously I had a pad on, I changed the pad. And then I was telling my mom, I think my water might be leaking because it was gushing. When my water broke with my last baby, it was a pop, and then I was gushing fluid constantly until I gave birth. This time, when my water started leaking, which this is what it was, but I didn't know at the time, it was weird and it was green because, well, I won't get it too far ahead. So I finally sat on the couch with my 2-year-old and I was watching something on the iPad with him because I had finally stopped cleaning, and I leaned to the left to pick something up on the floor and I completely gushed a huge amount of fluid, and I was okay, that's my water. There's nothing else that feels like that. So I called my husband and I told him, look, I'm 90% sure that my water is leaking and I think we need to go get it checked out because it's weird color. So I called my husband, I told him that, and he was okay, I'm gonna come home then. I'll tell my boss that this is most likely it. And I was ugh, what if it's not it though? I don't know. I was just feeling what if it's not? And that was his first day working. He works 3 days in a row usually, 12-hour shifts. So that was his first day of working. So I was what if you have to go to work tomorrow? Cause this isn't it. But I, in the back of my head, I knew it was. So basically in between the time of me talking to him and him getting home, I had gushed at least 3 or 4 more times, and I was absolutely certain that it was my water. And I didn't really put 2 and 2 together with the color being different. I was just thinking maybe it's my mucus plug mixed in with water. I don't know. So we headed to the hospital. It was rush hour, unfortunately. There was not that much traffic, thankfully. We live in a place where we live a half hour away from the hospital, but it wasn't too bad. I mean, it was traffic, but it wasn't so terrible. And luckily I had not been having contractions at all. That's another reason I was kind of skeptical of it being my water, because with my last one, my water broke, I got contractions an hour later, and I was horrible. So we got to the hospital. We parked, we walked in. It was a crazy windy night that night. It was freezing cold and it was super windy. And we got into the hospital and they kind of made us wait for an hour in the waiting room because they were trying to clean a bed. I don't know if it was an entire hour. Maybe I'm exaggerating. I think it was 40 minutes, but still, it was like way too long. And the people in the waiting room were kind of like, are you in the wrong place? Aren't you supposed to be like over there? Because I'm like the only big pregnant lady in this waiting room where all the families were. And I was like, oh yeah, they told me to wait here. And then after a while I was like, did they tell us to wait here? Did we walk by the wrong waiting room? But eventually the nurse showed up and she brought us back to the triage area and they hooked me up to the monitors and stuff. And eventually, finally, like an hour and a half after we got to the hospital, a nurse finally came in and examined me down there. She's like, well, I'm gonna put a speculum in, and then if like the water pools there, then we'll know your water broke. So she did it and she's like, yep, your water broke. And it looks like there is some meconium in the water. And I was like, what? So I guess the baby pooped inside of me, which is disgusting, but it is what it is. That usually happens, I guess, with people who have gone over, and he was only 39 weeks and I think I was 39 weeks and 6 days when I went into labor. So he was not overdue, so it was strange that he had pooped in there. But I have heard that like when mom has like a stomach bug or like stomach flu, the baby can have the urge to poop. Like if mom has diarrhea. I had really bad, horrible diarrhea like a week before this. So I'm thinking that must be it. I don't know. They told me because of the meconium stating they'll have a NICU team like ready for when I give birth. And I was like, wait, so ready for when I give birth? So I'm giving birth, so I'm in labor, so my water's broken, so we're staying? And she was like, yeah. So I was excited about that, but I was not excited about the meconium. It really freaked me and my husband out because we had heard a lot of horror stories about like meconium aspiration. And yeah, it was just like not fun. But we were just praying and hoping that nothing was gonna go wrong. They moved us to the labor and delivery unit finally from triage. They got us a room and it was a really nice room and it was huge. It was like way too huge. But I guess because they have like a bunch of doctors and nurses sometimes like for births, I think that's why it was so huge. It was just ridiculous. It was like enough for like 3 people. We got into our room. My husband was hungry and so he went and got some food at like Jack in the Box or something. At this time it was like 9 or 10 o'clock at night when we finally got settled in the room. And then the nurse came in and just told me like what we were gonna do, and basically they said they were gonna wait a couple of hours for me to like start having contractions by myself because it was still kind of gushing water, and I was having some contractions, but it was not anything super painful or consistent. They were like Braxton Hicks, but every time I was having like one of those contractions I was gushing fluid, and they hooked me up to an IV at this point. And I told her that I would like to get an epidural eventually, but like obviously not right then and there because I wasn't having any pain. But she said, okay, that's fine. I'm gonna hook you up to Pitocin because your contractions aren't coming consistently. And because of the meconium in the water, they wanted to make sure that they stayed in between that 24-hour window from when your water broke and till you give birth. I had technically had my water broke like at 2 o'clock the day before, so, or maybe even earlier because they had started kind of gushing earlier that day. So I was concerned and I was fine with the Pitocin. I've had a Pitocin before with both of my boys before this, so I had never really had a negative experience with Pitocin, and they said they were going to start it really slow. So I was basically like induced into this labor because my water breaking like did not create contractions, which is fine. So they started slow on the Pitocin. My husband had gotten back by then, thank God, because I was like, once they start this Pitocin, I'm going to need you. And I was getting up like every like 10 minutes to pee, and then every time I got up to pee I was leaking, and then the fluid, like my water, was getting progressively darker and more disgusting every single time I had a contraction. It was gushing out, like gushing like how I remember when my water broke with my last baby. So that was strange to me and very uncomfortable to like basically be peeing the equivalent of like an entire bladder worth of liquid all over yourself. Luckily I had like a kind of a crappy nurse in the beginning. Poor thing, she looked like maybe she was just new or something, but I'm a nurse, so I know, I can tell when nurses don't know what the hell they're doing. Poor girl, she didn't know what she was doing. She was okay with like the medicine and stuff, but like as far as patient care, she was just like not hands-on. She didn't know where any of the things were that I needed. I was like, can you get me like some like the big chucks, like because I'm leaking like so much fluid? And she gave me like this little like menstrual pad. Not gonna do anything. And then she gave me like a towel, like one little towel. I'm like, yeah, okay, well, whatever. So she went on her lunch break, I guess, and which is like at 2 a.m. or something, or 1 a.m. And meanwhile the contractions were getting more intense and stuff, so basically the gushing of my fluid was really intense and really bothering me. Honestly, probably bothering me more than contractions because it was just so yucky. Finally, I got like a good nurse and she was so good. She was so sweet and so good at being a patient advocate. Like, she was great. Anyway, I had told the other nurse before she went on her break, I was like, you know what? I think I'm ready for the epidural. They were bearable, but I knew it was going to get 10 times worse. And I knew that it usually takes 2 hours for them to even get the anesthesiologist here and like ready. And so I was like, I'm gonna tell her now because she doesn't look like she's like too on it. I told her before she left and then she said, oh, it's fine. He's here on the floor. So I was thinking, oh, great. Like, he'll be here like whenever I need him. In between that, the other nurse came in and she was so sweet. Like I said, really good nurse. And she came in and I told her, look, this other lady didn't give me anything. Can you please help me with like this pad situation? Like, I need something else. And she was like, oh, I got you. And she like helped me and like did it all up and it was great and actually lasted more than 3 minutes. So yeah, she was great. I told her about the epidural because my contractions by this point, it wasn't that long that I was on the Pitocin that the contractions started getting really painful. And I was like, you know, I don't know if she even mentioned my epidural that I want. I don't know if she's talked to the guy or whatever, but I really think it's like, you know, I need it. She's like, oh, like, let me make sure, let me get on it. And so she went and she found the guy and she was like, he's gonna come right now, he's in the next room. And then after her, like, you know. And so by this point I was like, okay, good, because these contractions really suck. My previous 2 births, I had epidurals and they worked perfectly, beautifully. I loved them. So I was perfectly fine with getting an epidural this time, especially that I was going to be getting Pitocin. I already knew it was not going to be a fun time. Basically, I endured a couple more contractions, and the one right before the anesthesiologist got there was horrible. And I was like, thank God I'm getting an epidural. This is going to be great. Little did I know. So he came in, and in between contractions, they did the epidural. All was well, I thought. My experience getting this epidural was different than with my last 2. I had a horrible pain shoot down my left leg. I felt the needle go, and it just didn't feel good. It felt terrible, but I was thinking, like, you know, maybe it felt different because I'm not in as much pain as I was when I got it with my first, because my first, I was in labor for a super long time and I was miserable. Second, I was in labor for only like a few hours, but the contractions were horrible, like terrible, because my water had already broken and all of my water was already almost out of me. So your contractions are way more powerful. And so I was thinking, like, maybe it's just like comparison, it's just different. I laid down after the epidural and like 5 minutes later, I realized that my left leg was numb as a log. My right leg was barely anything. Like, you could poke it and I could feel it. And my left half of my body was numb, like my stomach, barely. But every time I got a contraction, I could still feel all of it. And I was like, ooh, that's not good. And I told the nurse, she was like, you know what, let's flip you on your right side. Maybe like it'll make all the medicine go down there. And so they did that, and I was laying on my right side for a long time. And the anesthesiologist and the nurse kept coming back asking me if it worked, and I was like, no. I still feel all of my contractions. And so the anesthesiologist came in and he did a bolus, like that's when they put like a lot of medicine at one time, and I just felt like this rush, this terrible rush, not a good rush. It was horrible. I felt like someone like gave me some horrible like medicine that made my heart race, like, and it made my whole body burn. It was super strange. And it made me like have heart palpitations. Probably should have mentioned that to him. I don't know what I was thinking. I was just trying to be really polite. When I'm in like a medical situation, like in a hospital, because I'm a nurse, I don't like to complain to people because I feel like, God, I don't want to be that pain in the ass patient. And I definitely don't want to complain to the doctors. Like, I have like this like mentality because my grandpa's a doctor, and like I have like an old school mentality toward doctors where you just have to really respect them. So I just didn't want to question him, and I don't know, I just was not being a good advocate for myself. And the nurse kept coming in, this really good nurse who was a really good patient advocate, thank God, because if not, I would have just been miserable by myself crying in a puddle. She kept coming in and she's like, honey, if it's not working, you need to tell him and tell him to redo it or tell him to do something about it. And she's like, I'm gonna tell him, like, is that okay? And I was like, okay, that's fine. Like, finally, like, I let her do it. My poor husband was so tired because he had worked all day, and then he was up like till like 2 a.m. and so finally he was able to take a nap when I got my epidural, because he's thinking like it's gonna be like my last 2 epidurals, perfectly great. I could sleep, he could sleep, we just could sleep right through it. He slept right through it. I was miserable. So I felt bad to wake him up because I didn't want to be like a bitch and wake my poor husband up who had just worked all day. And so I was like, I could just do this by myself. I'm fine. I'm fine. I would get a contraction. This is while the nurse had gone and talked to the anesthesiologist. This is like in between this time. I was holding on to the side of the bed rail and I was on my side and the contractions kept coming. They were short in duration, but they were off the charts. Like, you know how they have that little like whoo chart for your contractions? My contractions were going up and then like there was no more up it could go, and it would just disappear for a while and then come back down. And I had felt really bad contractions, so I thought, but apparently my pain tolerance is like 0, and then on Pitocin 10 times worse. I was basically during every contraction grabbing onto the handrail and counting backwards from like 30, depending on where my brain would work and where my brain would start, and just trying to focus on something else, because if I focused on the pain, I was having like a breakdown. Like I wanted to just scream my head off. And I had not really done any hypnobirthing or anything this time around because it was my third baby. I was like, I got this. I know what a contraction feels like. I know how to deal with it. I'm fine. But this just shows you that every single labor is super different and it's just nuts. Finally, I woke my husband up because I was like, babe, I am dying over here. And he was like, what's wrong? Like he didn't even know my epidural didn't work. So the doctor kept coming in and trying to fix my epidural. He moved it over. He gave me another bolus and gave me heart palpitations and a panic attack, and nothing was working. And the nurse kept coming in and telling me, look, you could tell him to redo the epidural. But the last thing I wanted to do was sit up and redo an epidural, because to me, like, I was in so much pain, and the only way I could bear this pain, because I couldn't walk around, I couldn't do anything because my legs were numb as log. The only way I could bear the pain was sitting there with my arms on the rail of the bed and just breathing and counting backwards. Literally, if I did not do that, I was panicking and screaming. So basically, I kept refusing the redo of the epidural because I had such a negative experience with him injecting, and it wasn't working anyway. I was like, what if he just does it again? It doesn't work. And then like I said, I woke my husband up. I was like, babe, I need you to tell me that I could do this because I can't do this. Like I was to a point where I was like, I cannot do this. Like I think I was in transition. Another thing I didn't mention is this whole time, because of my water being broken, they didn't want to check me. They didn't want to stick their hands up there and like induce like more infection or whatever. They hadn't checked me at all. So I went in there at a 3. They finally checked me after I got my epidural and I was at a 6. So I'm pretty sure by the time like a couple of hours had gone by, I was having these hard contractions that had to be doing something. I was in transition. Like transition is the worst part of your labor and the worst contractions. I'm pretty sure going from 8 to 10, I was having these bad contractions. Also, another thing is the position that I was in and the position that the baby was in, which no one noticed because no one was sticking their hand up or feeling around or anything. They were just giving me medicine and hoping that my labor progressed, which is fine, except my baby was in a very strained position from the get-go. And I told them that, but they didn't listen to me. And because I was flopped on my right side, even during my whole pregnancy, when I would flop on my right side when I was sleeping or whatever, the baby would flop down into that like little pouch, like right above my hip. And so he had kind of settled into my hip bone. And so every time I was having a contraction, his head was just hitting my hip, and it was like horrible pain. And I finally mentioned it to this lovely nurse who is such an angel, and I told her, look, the pain is like so bad right here. I like feel like he's in a bad position. And she checked me and she was like, you know what, his head is over there. We need to position you in a different position. And they put this big old peanut ball thing in between my legs, and she's like, this will help get him out of that position and maybe it'll help you progress, because I was at like an 8 at that point, but his head wasn't there. His head was like over there, like shifted to like my right hip. Just the putting me in that position was miserable because my contractions were horrible, but I think that's what kind of got him unstuck. Like a couple of contractions later, I was having so much pain and pressure, and I told her, like, and I told Alex, my husband, that I was dying. I was like, I am convinced that I am dying because I cannot deal with the pain, and the contractions were right on top of each other. So the nurse came in and saw me screaming my head off, basically, and she was like, let's redo that epidural. Are you okay with that? I'm going to tell him to come back in and see if he could redo it. And I was like, you know what, that's fine, because I can't do this anymore. Right away he came in. Right away they sat me up, and I had been in that position with my legs like in that peanut ball thing for a little while, like good 6 contractions I had and I felt him moving. And when I flopped over to like sit up for the epidural, I felt the baby move into like the middle of my stomach. So it definitely moved him into the position that he needed to be to come out. When I sat up, I had a horrible contraction. Like, this is while he's redoing my epidural that I didn't even feel him do at all. And then I laid back down. He's like, okay, this should work now. It didn't. I mean, it numbed me maybe like this much more. Like this much more. I mean, I don't know if it was worth it, but it ended up being worth it after all. If I would have just sat up by myself, but it was just not happening. I probably couldn't even have done it because it was so just useless from the waist down. That probably would have progressed me to a 10. So I sat up to do the epidural, I laid back down, they checked me, I was at 10. And I was having this enormous amount of pain and enormous amount of pressure. And I felt like I'm gonna push this baby out. So if you watched my labor and delivery vlog, you saw this part. This is when my husband turned the camera on because he was like, okay, you're gonna have a baby now. Two nurses came in, she checked me, and it was like a training nurse and her. And she was like telling the trainee nurse, like, if we position her, she will have this baby. The baby's head, every time she has a contraction, is coming out. I felt that completely. And I was sitting there with my legs crossed. And they were saying, don't push, which is what they always tell you, which is like the biggest joke in the entire universe. If you've ever had a baby, you cannot hold in a baby. Like, you can't. Your body will just literally eventually start pushing by itself. And they called the doctor and they called the NICU team, and I was really pushing for them to call the NICU team. She wasn't going to call. She was like, oh, we have to wait till the doctor's here. I was like, no, you need to call now because this baby might come out now. And I was thinking about the meconium, thinking like, what if he takes his first breath and there's no freaking doctor here because they're taking forever. I was just like using all of my power to not push him out. Eventually the lady called the NICU team, which I was very thankful for because I was very nervous about that. And then they called the doctor again to make sure she was on her way, and she finally showed up. And literally between the time that she showed up and my son being born was a good 10 minutes at the most. So she basically put my feet in the stirrups. They got everything draped and stuff. And she informed me that I could push, and I did. I basically did not stop pushing because my contractions were like on top of each other. I think I stopped pushing for like maybe a minute, and then I had to push again. And at one point I was pushing and I could tell that they could see his head, and they were really like encouraging me like, go push, 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 push. But the contraction was stopping, so I was kind of like wanting to stop pushing, and so his head was kind of sucking back in. So I think that's when the doctor started to make the decision to give me the episiotomy, because his head was so big that it was not going through and it was getting sucked back in, and because of the meconium in the water, they didn't want him to come out and then get sucked back in and then take a breath or whatever with like all the fluid in his lungs. Both of my other boys took a breath like right when they came out, but I think that had something to do with their cord being around their neck, like that it was compressed, because usually babies won't take their first breath until the cord is clamped or cut. So I was really nervous about that, and so she told me, have you ever had an episiotomy or whatever? And I was like, yes, my first, not my second. And I was just thinking like, why do they always have to tell you right before they do it? Like, I don't want to know about it. So she got her little scissors, and the next contraction I was pushing and she snipped me. Like I said, his head was just so big and it was getting stuck. And so after that, I pushed again and his shoulders got stuck because he was in such a strange, like, I think it's called asynclitic position, where they're kind of like this. And I'm pretty sure he had his hands like this. So when he was coming out like strangely. So his shoulders got stuck in a strange position when I was pushing, and she had his head out, but his shoulders got stuck. So the nurse to my left, luckily, she was very experienced. So she saw that his shoulders were stuck, and she jumped, literally. I was so surprised that I screamed, like, because it hurt so bad what she was doing, but whatever, at least he got out. She jumped on top of me, like used her arms and just pushed on my stomach, and he plopped right out, and he was fine. He was screaming. They said that if he came out floppy, that they would take him straight to get like suctioned and like make sure he was breathing. If he came out like this, like with his arms like tight and like with good muscle tone, that he was fine. And so I remember them saying that, and I saw him and he looked great. They put him on my stomach, but I was still paranoid because I was like, do you need to suction his mouth? Like, what if he breathes? He was crying. I was like, what if he's breathing in meconium? I was having like a little mini panic attack. I was like, is he okay? Is he okay? And the NICU lady was right next to me, the doctor, and she was like, "Oop, I can't go anywhere yet, so I can't check him," because he was still attached to the umbilical cord, because the doctor had done, I guess by her judgment, he looked fine. So she did delayed cord clamping, which I've never had done. I know that sounds crazy. Really wanted that done with my first two babies, but it wasn't even an option because, like I said, they had their cord around their neck. But we were just in such shock. And my poor husband, in the video, I was thinking, like, people are gonna think that you like don't like give a shit about this baby or something, because you're like standing there. Like, if you guys could see his face in that video, his face was just like scared. Like, he was so nervous about the meconium thing, and he was so nervous that like something was gonna go wrong with me. Like, he was just so concerned for us that he froze. Like, he was just like frozen, standing there like watching all of this happen in shock. And then when the baby came out and he was fine, he was like, I was biting my tongue because I was gonna like completely start crying. I was just a mess. I think all of the like medicine they put in my epidural, my back was killing me. Like, I was just like in so much pain, but at that moment when I knew that he was fine, I was just so happy and so relieved, and so was my husband. It was just like the best feeling. So he came out, and the nurses were like, "Ooh, how big is your last baby?" or "How big were your last babies?" And I was like, "Oh, they were only 7, 13. And she's like, "Oh," and I couldn't figure out why they were asking me that, because I was like, he looks like a normal sized baby. Come to find out, he is my longest and chubbiest baby. Both of my other babies were 20 inches long and 7 pounds 13 ounces. Both of them were the same. So they weighed him, and he was 8 pounds and 6 ounces, and he was completely healthy, and he was 21 inches long. So he was my official biggest baby. But he was born and he was healthy, and we were so happy and excited and just relieved, because it could have gone so bad. It could have been like a big scary disaster, and he could have ended up needing to go to a NICU, and luckily he did not. So they took him away to bathe him and like do all like the pre-testing or whatever. This is like the first time taking a baby away from me for like such a long period of time. The hospital seemed to be very pro skin to skin and pro breastfeeding, but they're not pro like give the baby to mom right away, which I thought that was strange. They let me hold him for like a little bit, like a very short amount of time. I'd say like 12 minutes 15 minutes at tops that they let me hold him, and then they took him away, like I said, to do all like these newborn screenings or whatever. But I guess because it was change of shift, that's why they were in such a hurry to take him. I don't know. I was so exhausted because I did not get 1 ounce of sleep, like, and I hadn't slept the night before, so I was like running on E. When I first have my kids, when they have that little period of time that they take them away from me, my heart rate is like 40. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's an emotional thing. That's just my heart rate after I give birth. But for some reason, they're always really concerned with my postpartum hemorrhaging, and then postpartum heart rate is always super low. So every time my stupid blood pressure cuff kept going off, like during this 1.5 to 2 hours that they took the baby, they kept taking my blood pressure, and my heart rate was like 40. My heart rate was like 42. So the damn machine kept beeping. So I was trying to sleep, of course, because I'm so tired, and the machine just kept beeping. And then people kept coming in to do my like fundal massage, where they massage the top of your uterus so you don't bleed out, because especially me, because I have history of postpartum bleeding. So they gave me like all this medicine to make sure that I didn't bleed out. They kept me on the Pitocin drip, so I was still having a lot of pain, like with my after pains or whatever, especially because of the Pitocin, but that's good because it keeps your uterus from bleeding out. So the second they gave me the baby, everything was fine. I'm gonna include the clip that I have of me breastfeeding him for the first time, because I didn't include that in any of the vlogs, and I just have that footage, so I'll put that in right now. Oh my gosh. Oh, he's so cute. This eating it. Oh, he's cute, and he's so fat.
No, he's not fat. He's perfect.
Like, he's just chunky.
No, chunky is like 9 pounds, 10 pounds.
He's eating already. Alex, he's so into this.
I would be too.
Look at this. He's so into it.
Save some for me, Aaron. I meant Eli. Crap, I already did it.
I feel like I want to call my mom, but I don't want to wake her up.
Why? Wake her up. She needs to throw the trash out.
Oh, yeah.
We have so much trash, it's ridiculous. Receding hairline already?
Yeah, definitely.
Women love it.
Oh my god, so cute. And yeah, we just had such a good time with him once we finally got him, and we just like loved on him. He latched right away. He loved breastfeeding from day one. He had the perfect latch. So blessed. He is like my most peaceful baby. I will show you guys him too right now. He's dead asleep. Hey, you gonna wake up now? So yeah, that's my labor and delivery story. It was a long one, I apologize. This video is probably like a half hour long. I will link my first 2 labor and delivery stories. They are old, you have to bear with me. One of them is completely out of focus. They're from like 2 years ago or 3 years ago when I started YouTube. So I will link those. If you guys are interested, go watch those. If you are not subscribed, please subscribe to my channel. I upload every single week. And yeah, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.